All right, go ahead, Carmen.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining in this morning. And welcome to our first of our three-part series webinar by Applied Integration on backups, disaster recovery, and business continuity. My name is Carmen John, and I'm joined by Don Cockane, President of Applied Integration. How you doing today, Don?
I'm good, Carmen. Thank you.
Good, good. Now, Don has been in the IT industry for over 30 years with a focus in the building material industry. Don has helped many companies across the country, big and small, develop backup recovery and business continuity plans that have been tried and tested. Now, before we hear it from the expert, let's go over some basic housekeeping. I see a lot of folks are trickling in here. We're gonna keep everyone muted, and if there's any questions, put them in the comment box and we'll be sure to get to them. So without further ado, Don Cockane.
Thanks, Carmen. So thanks for joining us today, folks. So I promised to keep these webinars down to 30 minutes. So I'm going to jump right in and just get rolling here. I do want to explain what we're doing with this concept of kind of 3 webinars on this same topic. This is a pretty big topic that we're talking about because it kind of covers the backup methodology, basically the groundwork that makes sure you're doing your backups properly, which leads us then to disaster recovery of how we deal with the situation when everything goes wrong. And ultimately, we'll get to the third topic will be kind of this new concept of business continuity, which is really kind of a new level of being prepared to keep your business running no matter what happens. So we've broken it into 3 webinars. We will be recording all of them, but they will kind of build on each other. So if as we get further along, if you catch the disaster recovery one, maybe you missed this one, you'll want to make sure you check out the recording. But today's webinar, I'm going to start with the backup considerations that you need to be thinking about with the actual backup itself. And the reason we're going to start there is because there have been some changes to backup technology in the last few years and over time really that have maybe not been adopted by everyone, or maybe people, your business, you may not be aware of what's going on. And so we're not going to really try to get overly technical, but I am going to kind of try to give you a high level overview of some of these new technologies. And I'm also going to kind of just break periodically throughout this webinar and give you some kind of key questions that you need to know the answers to. And they're not overly technical questions, but if you can answer some of these big global questions about how your backups are being done and looked at and so forth, then you should be in a better position if something does go wrong. Now, like Carmen mentioned, I've been at this an awful long time here. Over 30 years, I've been kind of the guy that got the call when everything went sideways with businesses across the country. And I've seen it all. I've seen businesses burnt to the ground with the computer equipment all melted in a pile. I've seen businesses be robbed of their computer equipment, floods, hurricanes, you name it. And the reason that I've been able to have every one of the businesses that's been through one of those situations survive and get back into business and operate normally was because we paid close attention to the backups before the day we needed them. And that's all I'm trying to do today is make sure that you can take some time today to think about this backup process, to make sure that it's complete and well thought out, well designed, so that if that day comes that you discover that something's happened to your business, you're not caught trying to scramble around and figure out what, are you prepared? So in the 30 years I've been doing this, or now over 30, whenever I started the conversation with folks about backups, typically in the past, we've always had the big servers inside of the business, and it's generally easy to get people to be able to address how are the servers backed up. So that's never really been where the problem is. Everybody knows that the server or the server farm, whatever bunch of servers you have in there, those are the big iron piece of equipment that when those are unavailable, it affects a lot of people. So we've always known that, and I think everybody who's got a server in the building knows that if the server's down, it's chaos, people can't work. So whenever we started talking about backups, people go, well, the server's backed up, we know it's backed up, we know the schedule and so forth. But what I'm trying to do today is expand that vision just a little bit and make sure that you're thinking about the rest of the stuff that is data inside of your business that is high value, or that the people that use it are high value people and that data is important to them, but maybe it's not necessarily stuff that's on the servers today. So I just want to kind of expand our scope a little bit and talk about some of the other information that's created in your business that isn't living on the servers. And this might be, you know, something like as simple as a big Excel spreadsheet that's got the budget for the whole year mapped out in there. And, you know, it's not necessarily part of the server infrastructure, but it's a pretty important file when you think about it, because all the principals of the company might be getting together every quarter or every month, or, you know, more often than that even, and looking at that file, contributing to the input of that file, making sure it's exactly right. And so when you think about that one file all by itself sitting on a PC somewhere, it's really a pretty valuable piece of information. And we just want to make sure that we're including that in our umbrella coverage of our backups. Because, you know, obviously if that file gets lost, we're going to have to turn to some backup somewhere and get it back, or someone's going to have to waste a bunch of time trying to recreate that information. And while it might not bring the business to its knees, it's going to cost the business some money, because it's wasted time, it's maybe incorrect information, it gets rebuilt, and we just don't want to leave it out of the plan. So all I'm talking about here is the process of looking around the business for other information that's sitting on other systems that's got value to you, and make sure that you know that stuff's covered in this plan of backing everything up. We all know what COVID-19's done to us. It's sent people remote, and a lot of folks, as we've started to help people get through this process of going remote, having workers remote, haven't really paid much attention to the data that those workers are generating as they're outside of the business now. In some instances, it's been pretty low impact, because we've been able to turn those people around and get them connected back into the building, into the primary information systems that are inside of the business, so they can actually, you know, still use the system they were using when they're in the office. But we've also found instances of people just copying a bunch of data to a thumb drive, yanking that thing out of their work computer, taking it to their home computer, and putting those files on the home computer and working on them at home while they're working remote. And that's all well and good, but we better make sure we know where that information is, and we better make sure that we have some plan in place to, you know, back it up so that it doesn't get lost if that home computer gets corrupted or something happens to it. So our plan needs to be kind of a work in progress, and particularly as we've all had to adjust to remote workers, the plan has had to be even more dynamic to make sure that we're not only thinking about the stuff that's inside of the business, but we're also paying attention to the stuff that maybe has left the building. And lastly, as we're talking about the plan of data coverage and data protection, I do like to touch on cloud resources that people are using these days, because oftentimes I find that when people move maybe their line of business systems off to some cloud hosted environment, suddenly they just kind of wash their hands of all their backup thoughts, and they just assume that whoever's providing that service is backing it up properly, and everything is good, and nothing needs to be thought about. And even with services like Office 365, we find that people have kind of a incorrect expectation of what Microsoft is doing in terms of backup. And so suddenly something happens, an employee, you know, winds up having to get, you know, there's some action where they've violated intellectual property, of they've broken their non-disclosure agreement or something, and now suddenly email records become vital records that have to be pulled back from way back. And suddenly people discover that Office 365 isn't really keeping that stuff around forever, and that there should have been some additional backup stuff put in place to back up mailboxes. Or maybe you deleted an employee when you let them go because of a disciplinary action, and suddenly now they're suing you for wrongful termination, and you've got to go back and get access to that. And you didn't know that when you deleted their account in Office 365, all their mail got deleted as well. If you've thought about the backup of those cloud services, there are ways to make sure that you're protected, even though the stuff is not inside your business. So all I'm saying is, when we start to think about how we're keeping tabs on our stuff and making sure it's all properly backed up. We can't just think about the servers anymore. We've got to look around the whole business, and we've got to look at every machine and figure out, is there important information that's being generated that's stored on that machine locally? Are there these cloud applications that we have to think about? Have I got workers working at home and I need to be thinking about their stuff as well? So this is one of those points where you could jot down these key questions that I think if you can answer these questions, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape as far as thinking about the plan. And the first key question I like to make sure I know if I'm the one responsible for someone's backup is, can I identify all the data? Do I know where it all lives? Do I know what it is? And do I have some way of figuring out what's really important and what's maybe not quite so important? And as I'm looking at that, again, there's the big obvious stuff. Do I know what the situation is with the backups on my servers? Well, yep, I do. It's all great. But then do I also know about that important but possibly scattered around stuff that we just talked about that may be on people's individual machines and so forth? And then as we gather that all up, then we just want to make sure that it's covered by some portion of our overall backup plan. It might be covered by a different methodology than the servers if it's out in the cloud. It might even be being backed up by our vendor who's providing that cloud service, but we just better make sure we know that. So we just want to know with no assumptions that that stuff is in fact included in our backup structure and someone's looking after it, someone who can be held accountable if the bad things happen and we've got to go get to that data. So I talked about the changes in technology that I wanted to mention a little bit. And this is one that I find is not really very many people are doing backups to tape anymore, but in the years that backup has been kind of evolving, you know, it's taken the form of being written to different devices, and tape drives were one of those devices that was pretty popular for a long period of time, and it was a pretty vital part of most people's backup strategy. And nowadays, in today's environment, if you are still backing up to a tape drive, your risk level is really high that you're going to lose data when you need it most, because tape media is flexible magnetic media and it deteriorates over time. And the longer you use a tape cartridge, the higher the risk of that tape cartridge not being able to restore the data is. And so in today's environment, you should be backing up to physical disk drives. They can be solid state drives, they can be spinning platter drives, but you should be backing up to something that's on your network that is a collection of disk drives, because that is the best, most safest way to store data that's being backed up in today's environment. And the devices that I'm talking about are a physical piece of equipment, kind of like a computer chassis, that goes on your network and can have a lot of disk drives in there. So not only is it's disks, not tapes, but it's also set up with this technology called RAID technology, where if one of those disks actually crashes, that doesn't take the whole array down, we can just take out the dead drive, put a new one in its place, and the device will rebuild that structure and we don't lose anything. So disk technology is about the best there is now. And by using these redundant arrays of disks, we can make it very, very fault tolerant. So we reduce that risk a lot. But there is one other aspect of this that we do need to kind of think about a little bit. When we were backing up to tape drives, in a lot of cases, we were putting a controller card right inside of one of our servers and hooking a big fat cable up to our tape drive so that it had a very high bandwidth structure there, that it could write a lot of information from the server to the tape in a short amount of time. As we start migrating off to disk backups that are done across our network, we have to make sure that the network itself has the bandwidth to support that transfer of data. And the only reason I bring this up is because people are pretty aware of the fact that computers and servers need to be upgraded all the time, because the older computers are slowing people down and they're not very effective to use. But I do find that people don't really pay much attention to the physical infrastructure of their network necessarily. And what I'm talking about here is the switches on your network and the actual physical cabling too. If your cabling's been in your building for 10 years It may be old Cat5 cabling that's not really capable of supporting the high-speed data transfer that your computers can do. And so as we start to try to do backups to these disk arrays, we might find that the network itself is throttling us back, and that we're not going to have enough time to get the stuff done that we need to get done. So as part of this looking at your stuff, we just need to understand, are we using the best technology? And when I'm talking about the best technology, I'm not only talking about the place that we're writing the data, but I'm talking about the network infrastructure that's moving that data around as well. So again, just a couple of key questions that you should be able to answer without getting overly technical is, are you backing up to some internal device? And if so, is it a disk device or is it a tape device? And again, if you are still using tape cartridges, please get off those as quick as you can, because they're really subject to failure and they're not the best way to do it anymore. But so you should be backing up to some internal device. Your IT person or the person responsible should be able to walk into the computer room and point at it and go, that's where the backups land. And you also ought to be able to understand the redundancy that's built into that device, so that if one particular drive or one component fails, how does the rest of that device survive the failure of that one piece of equipment? Because there are various levels of that redundancy that can be built into equipment, and there's a kind of a good, better, best environment, and you just want to make sure you know which you are in, and that should be something that your person who's responsible for this should be able to explain to you. And then you just need to understand, is your network fast enough to move everything around? Or do you have enough time from the time that your folks go home at night till they come back in the morning and start using resources again to get everything backed up to the drives that you're going to? And if not, you know, where is the bottleneck and what do we need to do to get rid of that bottleneck? So again, touching on the changes that have taken place over time with backup technology, up until just shortly ago, the best way of doing backups was what we kind of call the full/incremental chain backup technology. And just again, without getting overly technical, the way this worked was you would take a day of the week that you were probably most likely closed or were open abbreviated hours so that you had the most time to work with, and that's generally Sunday. And the backup process on Sunday would be set to do a full backup of the entire server, for instance, and back it up completely, every single thing. So a full backup happens on Sunday, which backs up the entire server. And then on Monday night, what you would do is you'd run all through the day on Monday, and you'd come along Monday night, and then you would back up just the changes that took place between Sunday night and Monday night. So you would get all those changes. And then you come along Tuesday, and you get all the changes that took place between Monday night and Tuesday night. And you continue that process on through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, roll around to the next Sunday, you start over again with another full backup, and then do the incremental changes from there. Well, that's not really the best technology that's available today, because it is prone to problems. If any of the incremental backups in the middle of that chain break, just like breaking a real chain, everything from the break forward is lost. So what I'm talking about here is, if you were on, say, Friday of the week, and something happened, your server went up in smoke, and we started rebuilding it in this environment, we'd put a new server hardware down on the desk, and we'd restore the full Sunday backup. And then we would have to restore the full Monday backup. And then we'd have to restore the full Tuesday, you know, the full incrementals to build the server incrementally back up to the point where it was on Friday. But if the Wednesday incremental backup fails for some reason and is no longer valid, we're not going to be able to get Thursday, because we don't have Wednesday to build on top of. So in this methodology, we were starting at a single point of the full backup, and then each individual incremental had to be laid back down on top of the stack to get everything back. And if any of those incrementals are no good, everything from that failure point forward is just gone. So in that scenario I just talked about, if it's Friday and the server blew up and we start putting everything back together, but the Wednesday incremental is bad, where we're going to leave that server is clear back to Tuesday. That's the most recent information we're going to be able to get the server restored to. Even though Thursday's incremental was successful, it can't build on Tuesday's stuff without the Wednesday incremental being laid on there. So we're effectively dead from Wednesday on. We're not going to be able to bring that system more current than that. So that's the way it's worked for quite some time. And that is no longer the best way. And if you're using that, you do have some risk in your process, and you better make sure that the incremental backups are always good. There's a new way of doing it that's called an inverse chain technology, which gives us the ability to restore it at any point in time without always being dependent on the previous incremental backup. So if you're in this methodology, if somebody's explaining that this is how you bring it back, just know that there's a better way to do it today. Another thing that's important to factor into your backup plan is your information being sent off-site out of the building? Now, back in the days when I talked about us using tape drives, what we would do typically is at the end of the night, we would grab yesterday's tape and someone would physically carry it home with them, or they'd drop it in a safety deposit box at the bank or something like that. And the concept was there, just let's get a copy of the data off-site so that if the building burns to the ground overnight, the data doesn't burn up with it. And so the data has to be, you've got to keep a copy out of the building in case something catastrophic happens to the building. So if a tornado comes through and levels the building, you got to have your data somewhere else off-site, a copy of it, so that you don't lose everything. And the way this happens these days is the backup technology is usually responsible for transmitting this data off-site. And it will typically go off to a secure cloud environment, but there are some questions that you need to address as you start to think about this cloud portion of the backup process. And the first one that I like people to know is are you thinking about the fact that your data is being electronically transmitted from your backup off to some cloud storage device? And while it's being transmitted out there, is it being transmitted in a secure fashion? Is it encrypted during transmission, basically? So that what I mean by that is we don't want some bad guy to be sitting out on the internet somewhere looking at the outside of your firewall, watching this stream of data going out to the cloud storage place and being able to look inside of that stream of data and see your information. We want to make sure it's encrypted so nobody can see it. And then when it gets offsite into the point where it's going to be stored in the cloud, we want to make sure we understand what steps are being taken to keep it secure in that cloud environment. Is it locked inside of a data center? Is it stored on devices that are also encrypted? Am I the only person that can have access to that information? Is it safe and secure out there? But really the key question here when we start to think about moving stuff off into the cloud is, how much stuff can we move off to the cloud on any given day? So, if we're backing up 2 terabytes of data internally in our network and we're trying to push that off to the cloud every night, we better have a really fast internet connection to get that transfer done, because that might be a problem. So those are some key questions that you need to understand about getting the data offsite anymore, these days, now that we're not going to physically hold it in our hand and carry it offsite. But there are a few other things that we need to have to worry about with these cloud storage devices. And one of those is, what happens if a virus gets inside of the network? And when I'm talking about that kind of stuff, I always like to know, is it, can something get into my backup device? If a computer gets a virus on it inside of my network, can that virus spread to the backup device, or is the backup device encrypted so that a virus can't come along and further encrypt it? And another thing that I think it's important to kind of consider with this stuff is, if something happens and a virus gets into your network, let's say ransomware gets onto one of your servers and encrypts the whole server. So now none of the information on that server is available to us because it's all encrypted, and hopefully we get it stopped before it gets to other machines. But let's say we've got a major server with that same 2 terabytes of data on it, and it's now gotten encrypted, and we've got to get our data back out of the cloud now. Well, how do we address that situation? If we are putting the information on a device inside of our network first, then we're in a great spot to grab that information off the device and restore that server and just go back to a point in time before the virus happened. But let's say that the building burns down and we're trying to get 2 terabytes of data back from our cloud storage. How do we go about getting that large amount of data moved quickly? When I talked about whether we can move our information offsite quickly, we also have to think about, can we get it back quickly? And in some cases nowadays with cloud storage of backup stuff, people are basically writing their information directly from the server or the PC straight off to the cloud without ever stopping on an internal device. And so what happens is when you have to restore a bunch of information, those kind of backup providers assume that you're just going to get it all back straight over the internet, and they don't really have a methodology built to allow you to say, hey, send me a physical device with my full 2 terabytes of data on it overnight so I can have it tomorrow and get the whole thing here. Some of those cloud providers that are doing backups that way will just go, oh, sorry, we don't have any way to do that. And you're just going to have to stream it all down, which might take a week to get all this stuff back. So as part of the plan of thinking about all this stuff, not only do we have to think about how are we doing our backup, where are we storing it locally, where are we storing it so we're covered if the building burns down, and how do we react if the building does burn down and we've got to get it all back. So those are just some of the kind of key takeaways that we want to think about as we're thinking about the foundation of our backup plan. And the reason that we spend this time here again is just because we have to be ready if something bad happens. And if we haven't done our due diligence and we haven't spent our time, while nothing is wrong, building out a plan that's solid and well thought out, and we understand the big questions that we need to be able to answer with that plan. Now, those key questions are just the big non-technical questions that you need to understand as a business owner. Your IT guy has a whole much more complex list of things that he better be able to be held accountable to for the day-to-day maintenance of this backup plan. But if you guys haven't sat down together and fleshed out this plan to begin with, then on the day that you show up to work and smoke's coming out of the building, or a tornado rolls through and wipes the building down to its foundation, that's not the time to be thinking about, how we planned for a disaster. We've got to think about it before it happens, before we need it, or we're not going to be in a place to get the building back, get the business up and running, and recover from whatever happened. And again, I'm not saying that as rhetoric. I'm saying it because I've been through it, and I have seen those buildings where I got the call that said, hey, the building is burnt to the ground. What do we do? Well, we don't panic. We go back to our backup plan. We know exactly how we've prepared for this, and we begin implementing the restoration plan to get the business back up and running, and everything is as good as it can be in that kind of situation. So if any of this planning part, you've either found that some of these key questions you just flat don't know the answer to, or you are still packing a tape cartridge out of the business every night and thinking that that's as good as it gets, then it might be time to spend a little time really revisiting this, because you're not in the best position you can be, and your risk is higher than it needs to be that you're not going to be able to recover things properly if things go bad. So that's about our 30 minutes for today. I do want to thank you for attending this. We will be, again, doing another one where we're going to start talking about the process of bringing us back from a disaster. And then our third webinar, we're going to show you a way to keep the business running through a disaster. But we will also, any questions that come in as we go through these, we'll kind of wrap those up. And as we send out the recordings, we'll also answer those questions, or we'll reach out directly. If you'd like to spend a little time talking with me about your backups, please feel free to give us a call. We'll set up some time to do that. No real obligation. I really feel like, people need to understand how their business is protected, and I'd be willing to help you understand and figure out what questions you need to get answers to if you're not sure some of these things are covered properly for your business. So that looks like that gets me right to the end of our half hour for today. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And we'll see you on webinar 2, where we'll talk about how we survive when the bad things do happen. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.